In this lecture, we're going to talk about cohesive devices. We'll talk about what they are, why they're important, and how you can make sure that you use them appropriately in your letter. Now, to learn about why they're important, we need to have a look at the band descriptors again. So if we return to the band descriptors, this is what we see for different band scores. Let's start by looking at band 6. Band 6 tells us we need to use cohesive devices effectively. Put cohesion within and or between sentences may be faulty or mechanical. Now, band 7 tells us we need to use a range of cohesive devices appropriately, although there may be some under or over use. Note that band 8 and band 9 do not mention cohesive devices at all. Why might this be? Well, they don't mention cohesive devices at all because once you reach this level, cohesive devices generally work like gears, keeping everything running smoothly but working in the background, not the foreground. They're within the machine. You don't see them, you just see the machine running smoothly. So band 9, as you can see here, uses the expression uses cohesion in such a way that it attracts no attention. So we'll still use cohesive devices, but they'll almost be impossible to notice because we just don't think about them as we're going through. It's such an easy read. Now we're just focusing on band 7 here and trying to make sure we at least get a band 7, so we need to make sure that we use a range of cohesive devices appropriately. To do that, first of all, it's important to think, what are cohesive devices? So, a cohesive device is the name used for any word, expression, or sequence of language that helps the reader transition from one idea to the next smoothly. Remember, we do not only transition from one idea to another when moving between sentences, but we can also do this within sentences, and there are different expressions that we can use at different times. For example, if we think about within sentences, here's an example. The deadline is next Tuesday. So could you give me a hand with getting it done on Monday? Okay, so you can see that's within a sentence and we've used the word so, a cohesive device here. Between sentences, the deadline is next Tuesday. With that in mind, could you give me a hand with getting it done on Monday? Okay, so the same message being communicated in both sentences, but we can use a cohesive device within the sentence or we can choose to use one between the sentence. Whether you use one between or within really will be context dependent and kind of dependent on your own personal style as well and how you want to write. But sometimes it will be necessary to choose one or the other, sometimes it's a matter of choice. Let's think about different tones and different cohesive devices that will be dependent on different tones. So an important difference between task 1 and task 2 of the general training module is that in task 1 it may be inappropriate to use certain cohesive devices that you would normally use in task 2. The reason for that is that in task 1 we may be dealing with an informal letter where we want to present a more casual conversational tone. And we wouldn't do this in essays really, and that happens in task 2. So, for example, would you often use nevertheless or furthermore or lastly in a conversation with a friend? Probably not. Maybe in very specific circumstances, but you're pretty unlikely to use expressions like this. Instead, you would use expressions like, well, having said that, or also, one more thing. You can already hear in the tone of voice that I'm using that it's much more conversational. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're thinking about which cohesive devices to use. Now, I'm going to show you some examples of this difference between formal and informal, and I want you to look at these paragraphs and try to figure out which one is formal and which one is informal. I also want you to think about what are the cohesive devices being used in each paragraph. Let's have a look at the first. With regards to the details of the briefcase, it is a tan brown leather case with black stitching and 2 gold latches. In the event that this briefcase is found, please contact me on my mobile number listed above. Furthermore, I can be available between the hours of 6 PM and 8 PM this week if you need to liaise with me in person. And the second paragraph? So you know what you're looking for exactly, it's a tan brown leather briefcase with black stitching and 2 gold latches. If you do find it, you can call me on the number above. Just let me know if you need anything else. I'm also around in the evenings this week if you need to speak to me face to face. So, this should be pretty obvious. Which one is formal? Which one is informal? Of course, the top one is formal and the bottom one is informal. However, what are the cohesive devices being used here? Did you find them all? Let's have a look. Let's have a look at the first one. First of all, we've got with regards to, we've got in the event that, we've got furthermore, and we have if as well. Notice that if can of course be formal or informal. It's not a word that kind of denotes a level of formality, so don't worry about whether it's formal or informal. And we can prove that because it's in the next paragraph as well. So we have so you know, and if, we have also, and we have another if. Now notice there are not that many cohesive devices in the second paragraph. There are a couple of uses of if actually. You might be able to find more if you look very closely, but on the whole we haven't really used that many. And this is the point of cohesive devices as well. Don't throw them in there if they're not necessary. This would be an example of overuse. You can still score a band 7 with overuse, as we saw earlier, but don't just put them in there willy-nilly. You've got to really think about whether it's appropriate to do so and whether it would help the reader to do so as well. Otherwise, the text can be quite congested. Now we're going to have a look at some useful cohesive devices. But before we start, I want to put forward an important warning. I do strongly recommend reading other people's letters. I've recommended this throughout, I'll recommend it again. You need to read other people's letters to get a good idea of when and how to use cohesive devices in Task 1 General Training. We're looking at cohesive devices in isolation now, but this should not be used as a perfect reference. There is a lot of nuance when it comes to writing letters, particularly when you're thinking about tone. Still, the following slides should offer a good starting point for your practice, and you can follow up with Google and other resources to learn about how they might be used in a letter. And we will have a look at a couple of practice exercises afterwards as well. Okay, so I'm not going to go through these too much. I'm basically going to leave these on the screen for you, and what I recommend that you do is you could perhaps screenshot, or there will also be the PDF ebook available for you in the last lecture of this course that you can download, and then you can look at these more in your own time. But you can see here we have cohesive devices for beginning a list, adding another point, conditionals, switching direction in our points. That's for informal letters. And you can see the same categories here for formal letters. We also have cohesive devices for explaining something, for clarifying something, for referencing a point, and for summarizing some points. That's for informal letters, and same again here for formal letters. So as I said, you can find a full list of these in the PDF at the end of this course, so you can take your time looking at these at your own leisure. Okay, so as I said, we're going to have a look at some examples. You can see some cohesive devices along the bottom of the screen here. The reason for that is that we're going to have a look at a paragraph of an informal letter with these devices missing. Can you work out which ones go where from the selection? Make sure to change the punctuation or the language if necessary. Okay, so here is the paragraph. I'll just leave the paragraph here. We'll read it out in a moment. See if you can work out which cohesive devices go where. You might want to pause the video here and return in a moment. Okay, if you've worked that out, let's have a look. I'm sorry I couldn't write any earlier, but I do have some good reasons. So introducing a list here. First off, I was given this huge project to finish at work, though yesterday the deadline was pushed back when the manager realized it was just impossible to finish the work in that time frame. On top of that, I had to get this problem with my car fixed, which just took forever to get done. Thankfully, all of that's sorted now, so I can get back to normal life for a bit. So at each juncture, we're using a cohesive device to help the reader transition from one idea to another idea. Let's have a look at an example with a formal letter. Okay, you can see the cohesive devices along the bottom there. I want you to read this paragraph, see if you can work out where the cohesive devices would be inserted. And remember, change the punctuation or language if necessary. Okay, let's have a look and see if you've got those right. Please accept my apologies for my delayed response. This was due to several reasons. First of all, I had been working overtime to ensure the completion of a project prior to its deadline until the deadline was pushed forward to a more realistic date. Furthermore, I had been having car troubles that proved harder to fix than initially appeared, and this demanded a large portion of my time. However, all of the above issues have now been resolved. So again, we're communicating the exact same point as we did earlier, but we're using much more formal language and more formal cohesive devices. There are even some cohesive devices that are in the paragraph which I didn't put down at the bottom. Little conjunctions even like and can be referred to as a cohesive device, as they help us transition from one idea to another. Hopefully that gives you a good overview of what cohesive devices are, why they are important, both in terms of the band descriptors and in terms of writing in general, and also gives you an idea of how they can be used in your letter to improve the coherence and cohesion.